Hi, welcome to another video. So in this one, I want to talk about ByteRover and why I think it is a genuinely useful upgrade for OpenClaw users. If you've used OpenClaw for a while, then you already know the main issue. It is not that the agent cannot do things. OpenClaw is already very good at doing things. It can browse, code search, use tools, and run tasks for you. The real issue is memory. Over time, the agent can lose important context, forget decisions, or bring back the wrong thing from older notes. And when that happens, the whole workflow starts feeling less reliable. So this is where ByteRover comes in. ByteRover is basically a stateful memory skill for OpenClaw. You can install it from the official OpenClaw plugins, as it is officially integrated into OpenClaw. Integrate it into your OpenClaw setup and then use it as a much more structured memory system for your agents. Instead of just relying on flat notes, keyword matches, or generic vector retrieval, ByteRover curates memory into a hierarchical tree. So the memory becomes something the agent can query properly, and also something you can actually inspect as a human. And that is really the big thing it brings to the table. It is not just storing more memory, it is storing memory better. So let me explain what is new here. The first big thing is memory curation. With ByteRover, the agent does not just dump random chunks into storage and hope it can find them later. It curates knowledge into a tree structure. So if you are working on an OpenClaw project, your memory can be organized by project area, by feature, by architecture decision, by workflow, and by relationships between those things. That is much better than having a pile of text and asking the model to somehow make sense of it later. The second big thing is retrieval. ByteRover says it replaces the usual vector-style memory approach with a tiered retrieval pipeline, going from fuzzy text search to deeper LLM-driven search when needed, and according to ByteRover's public benchmark material, it gets around 92.19%, or rounded to 92.2% on the Locomo memory benchmark. So the point is not just that it stores memory, the point is that it can actually retrieve the right memory when the agent needs it. The third thing is that it is local first. This is something I like a lot. ByteRover stores the memory locally in Markdown inside the project, so you're not forced into some cloud-only setup. That means you can inspect it, manage it, back it up, and keep full control. But if you want portability later, you can also push that memory to the cloud, manage it there, and share it across machines, teammates, or different agents. So, in practical terms, what does this mean for OpenClaw? It means OpenClaw becomes much better for long-running use. Let's say you're using OpenClaw as your autonomous coding assistant or your research agent. Maybe today it learns how your authentication flow works. Maybe tomorrow it learns the billing rules. Maybe next week, it learns that there is a very specific pattern you always use for rate limiting or API error handling. Normally, that kind of knowledge can get buried or become inconsistent over time, but with ByteRover, that knowledge can be curated into the memory tree and reused properly across sessions. So when you come back later and ask OpenClaw about the auth flow, or ask it to build a new billing feature, it does not have to rediscover everything from scratch. It can query the structured memory and continue from there, which is pretty amazing, to be honest. Now, let's talk about integration, because this part is actually simple. ByteRover has an OpenClaw integration setup, so you do not need to manually build your own memory stack or wire together some weird database setup. You can just use the official setup flow. I will put the one-line setup command on screen and in the description. So, once you run that, ByteRover gets connected into OpenClaw, and then you can start using it as the memory layer for your agent workflows. What I like here is that this is not just a random plugin, it is actually built around the OpenClaw workflow. So you can let OpenClaw save useful memories, query those memories later, and keep building on them over time. In the setup, you can also enable features like automatic memory flush and the context plugin, which helps inject relevant memory back into prompts. So the whole thing becomes a loop. OpenClaw learns something, ByteRover stores it in a structured way, and then OpenClaw can use it again later. So that is the integration part. Now, what does it bring new to the table compared to just using OpenClaw by itself? The simplest answer is this. ByteRover gives OpenClaw a real memory system instead of just a memory dump. That is the biggest difference. Without something like this, your agent might remember some things, forget others, and often retrieve context in a messy way. With ByteRover, memory becomes curated, hierarchical, and much more controllable. You can actually see how the knowledge is organized. You can reason about it, you can manage it, and because it is structured, multiple agents can use the same memory much more effectively. This is another really important point. If you're running multiple OpenClaw agents or even just multiple sessions, ByteRover lets them share the same memory layer. So one agent can discover something important, save it into memory, and then another agent can use that same memory later. This is super useful for coding workflows, research workflows, or any setup where you do not want every single session to keep reinventing the wheel. And if you want to go further, you can push that memory to the cloud and share it across machines or with your team. So imagine you start on your laptop, then move the workflow to a VPS or another device running OpenClaw. Instead of starting from zero, you just pull the same memory base and keep going. That is really good. Now, let's talk about how it works in a very simple way. First, OpenClaw does some work. Maybe it reads docs, works on code, or figures out a workflow. Second, ByteRover curates the useful information from that work into a structured memory tree. Third, later on, when OpenClaw needs context, it queries ByteRover instead of relying only on scattered notes or vague retrieval. Fourth, that memory can be reused by the same agent, another OpenClaw session, or another OpenClaw agent entirely. And fifth, if you want portability, you can sync that memory to the cloud and use it elsewhere. So it is actually pretty straightforward. Now, one thing I also want to mention is cost, because this matters a lot. The nice part is that you do not need to pair ByteRover and OpenClaw with the most expensive APIs right away. In fact, if your memory is better, you can often get more out of cheaper models because they have better context to work with. So if you want free or low-cost APIs to use with OpenClaw, there are a few good starting points. The first one is OpenRouter. OpenClaw supports OpenRouter, and OpenRouter has free model variants and a free router option that are great for testing. Now, they are not something I would rely on for heavy production work because the free options can be rate limited, but for experimenting with OpenClaw, testing ByteRover, and seeing how the workflow feels, this is a really good option for sure. The second one is Nvidia's API platform. OpenClaw also supports Nvidia, and Nvidia provides free trial access for a lot of its API catalog models. So, if you want to try an OpenAI-compatible API endpoint without paying a lot up front, that is another really good path. Again, for production, you will want to think about limits and reliability. But for testing and experimentation, it is great. And honestly, this is where the ByteRover angle becomes even more interesting. If you combine OpenClaw with free or cheap APIs, the model side might be a bit weaker than top-tier paid models. But once you add better memory, those models can perform much more consistently because they are pulling from curated context instead of starting from zero all the time. So, in a way, ByteRover does not just improve memory, it can also make your cheaper OpenClaw stack feel smarter. Now, if I had to summarize the whole thing very simply, I would say this: OpenClaw gives you the agent. ByteRover gives that agent structured memory. And providers like OpenRouter and Nvidia give you affordable ways to power the model side. That combination is what makes this interesting, because now you have an autonomous OpenClaw setup that is not just doing tasks, but also building up reusable knowledge over time. I think that is the real value here. It is not flashy in the same way as a new model release. It is not just a benchmark headline, it is a practical upgrade. So, your OpenClaw instance becomes more consistent, more reusable, more shareable, and more controllable. And if you're serious about long-running agents, that matters a lot more than people think. So if you use OpenClaw and you feel like the missing piece is memory, ByteRover is definitely worth checking out. Install the ByteRover OpenClaw setup from the link in the description, connect it to your OpenClaw instance, and if you want to keep costs low, start with OpenRouter free options or Nvidia's free trial APIs and see how it feels. Overall, it's pretty cool. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this video, consider donating through the Super Thanks option or becoming a member by clicking the Join button. Also, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye.